It was a sunny day in London. I wanted to visit my uncle and aunt in South Kensington. They had a new house, and I was excited to see them. I woke up early and packed my suitcase the night before. I thought it would be a good day, but I didn't know that this day would be full of disappointments. I booked a taxi on my phone. It arrived quickly. The driver was an old man with gray hair. He smiled and helped me put my suitcase in the car. But when we started driving, the taxi made a loud noise. Smoke came from the back of the car. I felt worried, but I told myself not to think too much. It's just an old car, I thought. We were driving through Camden Town. The streets were busy with people. The sun was shining, and everything looked normal, but the noise from the car got louder. We drove past King's Cross Station, and suddenly the taxi stopped. The driver tried to start the car again, but it didn't work. I looked at the clock. My train was leaving soon. This was my first disappointment. "I'm sorry," the driver said. "The car is broken. I need to call for help." I didn't have time to wait for help, so I got out of the taxi. I stood on the street with my suitcase. I needed to get to Victoria Station. I waved my hand and called another taxi. Luckily, a new taxi came quickly. I got in and told the driver to go to Victoria Station fast. The driver nodded and we started moving, but there was a lot of traffic. We drove slowly through Bloomsbury, past the British Museum. The streets were full of cars and buses. My heart was beating fast because I was afraid I would miss my train. As we passed Trafalgar Square, the traffic stopped completely. I checked my phone. I had only 20 minutes to catch my train. Will I make it? I thought. The driver tried to make me feel better. "Don't worry, we will get there," he said, but I wasn't sure. The minutes passed, and we didn't move. Finally, the traffic started moving again. We passed Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament. Usually, I would enjoy seeing these famous places, but today I didn't care. All I wanted was to catch my train. When we arrived at Victoria Station, I ran out of the taxi. I thanked the driver quickly and rushed inside. The station was very, very busy. People were walking fast, holding their bags and looking for their trains. I looked at the big clock. My train was leaving in 10 minutes, but I didn't have a ticket yet. I rushed to the ticket counter, but there was a long line. I counted the people in front of me. There were at least 20. The line moved slowly. I looked at the clock again. I knew I would never get my ticket in time. This was my second disappointment. I thought hard about what to do. If I waited in line, I would miss my train, but if I didn't buy a ticket, I could still catch the train and pay later. I made a quick decision. I left the line and ran to the platform. The train was already there, and people were getting on. I ran faster, pulling my suitcase behind me. The platform was very crowded. People were pushing and hurrying to get on the train. I felt nervous, but I had to get on. When I reached the train, it was hard to get inside. So many people were trying to squeeze in. I pushed through the crowd, holding on to my suitcase. It was difficult, but I found a small space to stand near the door. The train was full. People stood very close to each other. My suitcase kept getting in the way, and people stepped on it as they walked by. My arms were tired from holding on to the rail above me. I felt frustrated, but I told myself to stay calm. I will be in South Kensington soon, I thought. Then I smelled something terrible. Cigarette smoke filled the air. Some people near the door were smoking, even though it was not allowed. The smoke made me feel sick. I covered my nose with my hand, but it didn't help much. I wanted to say something, but the train was too crowded. I didn't want to cause trouble. As the train moved through London, I looked out of the window. We crossed the River Thames, and I could see the London Eye in the distance. We passed Vauxhall and Clapham Junction. Each stop brought me closer to South Kensington, and I started to feel hopeful again. But then the train suddenly stopped. There was an announcement. "We are sorry for the delay. There is a signal problem ahead. We will be stopped for a short time." I sighed. This was another problem. The train was already late, and now we were stuck. I looked out of the window. There was nothing to see but houses and a few trees. I felt tired and frustrated, standing in the crowded train with no way to escape the smell of cigarettes. After a long wait, the train finally started moving again. I felt a little better, but my legs were sore from standing for so long. I couldn't wait to get off the train and see my uncle and aunt. Chapter 2. The Biggest Disappointment. After what felt like hours, the train finally arrived at South Kensington. I gathered my things, trying to keep calm. People were rushing to get off the train, so I waited for my turn. As I stepped onto the platform, I breathed a sigh of relief. The fresh air felt good after being in that smoky, crowded train. I pulled my suitcase behind me and made my way to the exit. The station was much quieter than Victoria, and I started to feel a little better. I imagined my uncle and aunt waiting for me at their house, ready with a warm meal and welcoming smiles. I thought this difficult journey would soon be forgotten. I exited the station and looked around. South Kensington was a beautiful area, full of grand buildings and quiet streets. The sun was shining and the air was fresh. I checked my phone for the address of my uncle's house and started walking. It wasn't far, just a few blocks away. As I walked down the street, I thought about the last time I visited my uncle and aunt. They had always been so kind to me. I was looking forward to spending time with them in their new home. I could almost smell the food cooking in their kitchen. I smiled to myself, thinking that this bad day was about to turn around. Soon, I reached their street. I looked for their house number and walked up to the door. My heart was full of excitement as I knocked on the door. I waited for a few seconds, expecting my aunt to open the door with a big smile, but no one came to the door. I knocked again, a little harder this time. Still, there was no answer. I looked around, wondering if I had the wrong house. I checked the address on my phone again. It was the right house. But why was no one answering? Feeling a bit worried, I tried ringing the doorbell. The sound echoed inside the house, but there was still no response. I waited for a few more minutes, then tried calling my uncle's phone. It rang and rang, but he didn't pick up. I started to feel uneasy. I hadn't heard from them in a few days, but I thought they were just busy. Now, Standing in front of their locked house, I wasn't so sure. My excitement turned into confusion. Where could they be? I thought. I decided to try calling my aunt. Her phone also rang, but like my uncle, no one answered. I stood there feeling a bit lost. I didn't know what to do next. I had come all this way, but now it seemed like no one was home. As I stood on the doorstep, a neighbor walked by. She was an older woman with a kind face, carrying a shopping bag. She smiled at me, and I decided to ask her if she knew anything. "Excuse me," I said politely. "Do you know if the people in this house are home?" The woman looked at the house, then back at me. "Oh dear," she said. "I'm afraid they're not here. Your uncle and aunt went to visit family in Chennai. They'll be away for a whole month." My heart sank. A whole month? I couldn't believe it. I had come all this way, and they weren't even here. This was the biggest disappointment of the day. "Oh no," I said, feeling the weight of my long, tiring journey. I didn't know they were going away. The woman gave me a sympathetic look. "That's unfortunate. I think they left just a few days ago. I'm sorry, love. It looks like you'll have to come back another time." I thanked her and watched as she walked down the street. I stood there in front of the locked house, feeling completely lost. What was I going to do now? I didn't have enough money for another train ticket, and I certainly didn't have a place to stay. I sat down on the steps in front of the house, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on me. Everything had gone wrong, from the broken taxi to the crowded train, to now standing in front of an empty house. I had been looking forward to this visit for so long, and now it felt like my efforts had been for nothing. I thought about what to do next. Should I go back to the station? Should I try to find a hotel for the night? But I didn't have much money left. I pulled out my phone and looked at my bank account. It wasn't good. I had spent most of my money on the train ticket and taxis. I could maybe afford a cheap room for one night, but that would leave me with almost nothing for food or my trip back home. I felt a lump forming in my throat, but I took a deep breath and told myself not to cry. "You'll figure this out," I whispered to myself. "You always do." I decided to try calling a friend who lived in London. Her name was Sarah, and she was always kind and helpful. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, but I hoped she would be able to help me now. I dialed her number, praying she would answer. After a few rings, she picked up. "Hello?" she said. "Hi, Sarah, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I hope you're doing well. I'm actually in South Kensington right now, and I've had a bit of a problem." I explained the situation to her, telling her about my journey and how my uncle and aunt were out of town. "Oh no, that's terrible," Sarah said. "I can't believe they didn't tell you they were going away." "I know," I said with a sigh. "I don't know what to do. I don't have much money left, and I'm stuck here." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Sarah spoke. "Well, you're in luck," she said. "I'm actually not far from you. Why don't you come over to my place? You can stay with me tonight." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Really? Are you sure?" I asked. Of course, Sarah said. It's no trouble at all. I'll text you my address. I thanked her over and over, feeling incredibly grateful. Within a few seconds, I received a text with her address. It was only a short walk from where I was in Earl's Court. I quickly grabbed my suitcase and started walking. As I walked through the quiet streets, I felt my mood lifting. Sarah's kindness had saved me from a very bad situation. I was still disappointed that I couldn't see my uncle and aunt, but at least I had a place to stay for the night. I could rest, and tomorrow I would figure out how to get back home. When I arrived at Sarah's apartment, she greeted me with a warm hug. Come in, she said. You must be exhausted. I nodded, feeling both tired and relieved. Sarah's apartment was cozy and welcoming. She led me to the guest room, where I put down my suitcase and sat on the bed. Thank you so much, Sarah, I said. I don't know what I would have done without you. Sarah smiled. Don't mention it. Now how about we order some food and relax? You've had a long day. I agreed, and we spent the evening eating pizza and talking about everything that had happened. Despite the disappointments of the day, I felt lucky to have a friend like Sarah. I knew that things would get better from here. Chapter 3. A New Plan. The next morning, I woke up in Sarah's guest room. Sunlight streamed through the window, and I felt a bit more relaxed after a good night's sleep. Sarah had been so kind, letting me stay at her place, and now I had to figure out what to do next. I sat on the bed and thought about my options. My uncle and aunt wouldn't be back for a whole month, and I didn't have enough money to stay in London much longer. I needed to return home, but my train ticket only got me to London, and I didn't have enough for the return trip. I decided to talk to Sarah. Maybe she could help me come up with a plan. I got dressed and went to the kitchen where Sarah was making breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the air, and she smiled as I walked in. Good morning, she said cheerfully. How did you sleep? Much better, thanks to you, I replied, sitting at the table. I really appreciate everything, Sarah. You've saved me. No problem at all, she said, placing a cup of coffee in front of me. So, what's the plan for today? Have you figured out what you're going to do? I sighed. I'm not sure yet. I don't have enough money to buy a new train ticket to go home. I guess I'll need to figure out another way to get back. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Well, let's think about this. Do you have anyone else in London who could help you? Or maybe we could find a cheaper way for you to travel back. I thought for a moment. I didn't know many people in London, and the ones I did know were either busy or lived too far away to help me. But Sarah was right. There had to be a cheaper option. Maybe I could take a bus, I said. It would be slower, but I think it would cost less than a train. That's a good idea, Sarah said. I'm sure there are some budget buses that go to your city. Let's check online. We both pulled out our phones and started searching for bus tickets. After a few minutes, Sarah found a company that offered cheap bus rides. The ticket was much cheaper than the train, but the journey would take several hours longer. I found one, Sarah said, showing me her phone. It's not the fastest option, but it'll get you home. I looked at the screen. The bus left from Victoria Coach Station, and the trip would take about 6 hours. It wasn't ideal, but it was my best option. I quickly checked my bank account again. With the money I had left, I could just about afford the ticket. "I think this will work," I said, feeling a little more hopeful. "It's not perfect, but at least I can get home." Sarah smiled. "Good. I'm glad we found a solution. I can take you to the station later today." I thanked her again, feeling relieved that we had figured something out. Sarah had truly been a lifesaver. After finishing breakfast, I packed up my things and got ready to leave. Sarah and I spent the morning chatting and watching TV, and I felt grateful for her company. As the time for my bus approached, Sarah helped me carry my suitcase down to the street. We hailed a taxi and made our way to Victoria Coach Station. The streets of London were busy as usual, but this time I didn't feel the same stress I had felt the day before. I was on my way home, and soon this difficult trip would be over. When we arrived at the station, I bought my bus ticket and waited for the bus to arrive. The station was busy with people coming and going, but I felt calm. Sarah stayed with me while we waited, and we talked about our plans for the future. She told me about her job and the fun things she had planned for the weekend. "I'm really glad we reconnected," Sarah said. "It's been great catching up, even if it was under strange circumstances." "I feel the same way," I said. "It's funny how things work out sometimes. I didn't expect my trip to go like this, but I'm glad I got to see you." Soon my bus arrived. It was a large blue bus with lots of passengers already on board. I said goodbye to Sarah, giving her a big hug. "Take care of yourself," she said, "and let me know when you get home safely." "I will," I promised, waving as I boarded the bus. I found my seat and settled in. The bus was more comfortable than I expected, and I felt ready for the long ride ahead. As we pulled out of the station, I looked out the window, watching the busy streets of London fade into the distance. The bus made its way out of the city, and soon we were on the motorway, heading toward my home. I leaned back in my seat, thinking about the past couple of days. It had been a tough journey, full of unexpected problems, but in the end, things had worked out. I had learned a lot, and I felt proud of myself for staying calm and finding a solution. As the bus drove through the countryside, I thought about my uncle and aunt. I was still disappointed that I didn't get to see them, but now I had a reason to visit them again in the future. Next time, I would make sure they were home before I traveled. The journey was long, but I passed the time by reading a book and listening to music. Every so often, I looked out of the window at the fields and small towns passing by. It was a peaceful ride, and I felt grateful that I was finally on my way home. After a few hours, the bus made a stop at a small service station. I got off the bus to stretch my legs and grab a snack. The air was cool, and the sun was starting to set. I looked around at the other passengers, many of them standing in line for food or talking on their phones. Everyone seemed tired, but there was also a sense of quiet relief in the air. We were all on a journey, and soon we would reach our destinations. I bought a sandwich and a bottle of water, then returned to my seat on the bus. As the bus started moving again, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. I had been through so much in the last 2 days, but now I was almost home. As night fell, I closed my eyes and rested. The gentle movement of the bus lulled me into a light sleep, and I dreamed of better, simpler journeys. Journeys where everything goes right and there are no surprises or disappointments. Before I knew it, the bus was pulling into the station near my home. I opened my eyes and looked around. We had arrived. I gathered my things, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. I was finally home. As I stepped off the bus, I felt a cool breeze on my face. The sky was dark, but the streetlights lit up the familiar streets around me. I was tired, but I also felt stronger. I had made it through the worst parts of the journey, and now I was back where I belonged. I called a taxi to take me the rest of the way home. As I sat in the back seat, I thought about everything that had happened. I had faced disappointment after disappointment, but in the end, I had found a way through. When I finally walked through the door of my house, I felt a deep sense of peace. I was home, and that was all that mattered. Chapter 4. A Lesson. Learned. After finally arriving home, I dropped my suitcase by the door and took a deep breath. My long and challenging journey was over, and now, standing in the comfort of my own house, I felt a sense of relief and peace. The weight of the past few days lifted from my shoulders, and I knew I had learned something important through this experience. I sat down on my couch, reflecting on everything that had happened. From the broken-down taxi in London to the crowded train, and then the disappointment of finding my uncle and aunt's house locked. It had been a series of unfortunate events, but despite the difficulties, I had made it home. I realized that I had grown stronger because of it. I couldn't help but smile as I thought about Sarah. She had been such a good friend to me when I needed help the most. Her kindness and hospitality were something I would never forget. If it weren't for her, I would have been lost in London with nowhere to go and no money for a hotel. I promised myself that I would repay her kindness one day, maybe with a surprise visit or a gift to show how grateful I was. As I unpacked my suitcase and settled back into my home, I thought about the journey in a new way. Yes, it had been difficult, but in some strange way, it had also been an adventure. I had faced each problem and found a way to overcome it. I had traveled through some of London's most famous areas, like South Kensington and Earl's Court, and even though the journey wasn't what I expected, it had still been a learning experience. I remembered something I had read once. Traveling is a kind of education. It was true. This trip had taught me so much more than just how to get from one place to another. It had taught me patience, resilience, and the importance of staying calm in tough situations. Even though the journey didn't go as planned, I was proud of how I had handled it. The next day, after a good night's sleep in my own bed, I woke up feeling refreshed. I decided to call my uncle and aunt to let them know what had happened. I knew they hadn't meant to leave me in the dark about their trip to Chennai. It was just a misunderstanding, and I didn't want to hold it against them. I dialed their number and waited as the phone rang. After a few moments, my aunt picked up. "Hello," she said, her voice warm and familiar. "Hi, Auntie. It's me," I said with a smile. "I just wanted to let you know that I made it home safely." "Oh dear, we were so worried when we realized you were coming to visit," she said, sounding genuinely concerned. "We didn't know you were planning to come. I'm so sorry we're not there. We left for Chennai just a few days ago." "It's okay," I said, laughing a little. "It was a bit of a surprise when I found the house locked, but I figured it out. Sarah helped me, and I ended up staying with her for the night." "I'm so glad you had someone to help you," my aunt said, relieved. "We'll make it up to you when we're back, I promise. You'll have to visit again soon, and this time we'll be home." "I'd love that," I said. "I'll make sure to call ahead next time." We chatted for a little while longer, catching up on family news and plans for the future. It felt good to talk to her and to know that there were no hard feelings about the mix-up. When we ended the call, I felt even more at peace. I knew I would visit them again, and next time, everything would go smoothly. Over the next few days, life returned to normal. I went back to my routine, but something had changed. I felt more confident, knowing that I could handle unexpected situations. The journey had tested my patience and my ability to stay calm under pressure, and I had passed that test. One afternoon, as I was sitting at my desk, I decided to write about the experience. I pulled out a notebook and began jotting down everything that had happened, from the moment I stepped into that smoky, noisy taxi to the time I finally walked through my front door. As I wrote, I realized that this story could help other people too. Sometimes, when things go wrong, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and upset. But there's always a way through. And often, we come out stronger on the other side. I titled my story, "A Bad Journey That Taught Me Something Good," and decided that one day I would share it with my friends, or maybe even publish it online. It was a reminder that even the most difficult journeys have value, and we can learn from every challenge we face. In the weeks that followed, I stayed in touch with Sarah. We laughed about the strange series of events that had brought us back into each other's lives, and we promised to meet up again soon under less stressful circumstances. I also started planning my next trip to visit my uncle and aunt. This time I would make sure they were home before I made any travel plans. But I wasn't worried anymore. Even if something went wrong again, I knew I could handle it. I had learned that I was stronger than I thought, and that was the most important lesson of all. Final chapter. The journey. Within a few months had passed since my challenging trip to London. Life had returned to normal, but the lessons from that journey stayed with me. It had been an experience full of unexpected problems, but I now looked back on it with a sense of pride. I realized that I had grown, not only in how I handled difficult situations, but also in how I approached life in general. One evening, I was sitting in my living room, sipping a cup of tea. It was one of those peaceful moments when you have time to think and reflect. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. "Hey, long time no see. How about a reunion? Miss our talks." I smiled, remembering how much Sarah had helped me during that tough time in London. She had been my lifeline when everything seemed to go wrong. I texted her back right away. "I'd love that. Let's plan something soon." We quickly made arrangements to meet up in London again, but this time things were going to be different. It wouldn't be a stressful, rushed visit. We would spend a day together, enjoying the city and catching up on all the things we hadn't talked about in a while. The idea of a peaceful, well-planned trip sounded wonderful to me. A week later, I found myself on the same train heading to London, but this time I was ready. I had booked my tickets in advance, packed a light bag, and made sure everything was organized. I even checked with Sarah to confirm our meeting spot at a cozy cafe in Covent Garden. No surprises this time. As the train sped along, I looked out of the window, watching the countryside roll by. I thought about how different this journey felt compared to the last one. There was no rush, no panic, and no disappointments. But I also realized that without the struggles of my previous trip, I wouldn't have learned what I now knew. Every experience, good or bad, adds something to who we are. When the train arrived in London, I calmly collected my bag and stepped off, feeling relaxed. The station was busy as usual, with people hurrying to and fro, but I wasn't in a rush this time. I found a taxi easily, and before I knew it, I was on my way to meet Sarah. As the taxi moved through the streets of London, I passed by some of the places that had caused me so much stress on my last trip: Earl's Court, South Kensington, and Victoria Station. This time, instead of feeling frustrated or tired, I felt a sense of calm and even nostalgia. These places were part of my story, a story that had changed me for the better. When I arrived at the cafe, Sarah was already waiting at a small table by the window. She waved enthusiastically when she saw me, and I felt a rush of happiness. I walked over and we hugged, laughing about how long it had been since we last saw each other. "Look at you, all calm and organized this time," she said. Sarah teased, her eyes twinkling. "I learned my lesson," I said, smiling. "No more last-minute travel plans for me." We ordered coffee and spent the next few hours catching up. Sarah told me about her latest adventures in London, her work, and some funny stories from her travels. I told her about how life had been since the infamous trip and how I had reflected on the experience. "I never thought that trip would turn out the way it did," I said, "but looking back, I'm actually glad it happened. I learned so much about myself." "I guess that's the thing about bad journeys," Sarah said thoughtfully. "They teach you things you wouldn't learn otherwise. It's like you grow from the struggles." I nodded. "Exactly. I think I needed that experience to realize I could handle more than I thought. It wasn't fun at the time, but it helped me become stronger." We continued talking, laughing about our shared memories and planning future trips. Sarah mentioned a possible trip to the countryside, and I felt excited about the idea. This time, we'd plan everything carefully, but I also knew that if something went wrong, it wouldn't be the end of the world. After a wonderful day in London, it was time to head back home. This time, my departure wasn't rushed or stressful. I said goodbye to Sarah at the station, knowing we'd see each other again soon. On the train ride home, I reflected on how far I had come since that chaotic journey months ago. What started as a series of disappointments had turned into one of the most valuable learning experiences of my life. I had learned patience, resilience, and how to stay calm even when things didn't go according to plan. As the train pulled into my home station, I felt a deep sense of peace and accomplishment. This journey was different from the last one, but in a way, they were both connected. One had taught me how to handle life's unexpected challenges, and the other had shown me how to appreciate the beauty of a smooth, well-planned trip. Stepping off the train, I realized that the most important journey wasn't the one to London or back. It was the journey within myself. I had grown, learned, and become stronger, and that was the greatest destination I could have ever reached. The end. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this story and learned something valuable from it. Remember, every journey, whether good or bad, has something to teach us. Until next time.